The number one thing I've always hated about the self-help and personal development space is this attachment that they have to positivity and positive thinking, affirmation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm an optimist through and through, but I have always actually had the lowest points of my life when I've been most attached to thinking positively. And I guess it makes sense because if you can think back on a time in your life when you felt great, you were probably having positive thoughts and you were probably taking a lot of action towards the things that mattered most to you, goals, whether in your fitness or your finances or in your career, or even, the beginnings of a positive new relationship. So it's logical to attach, positive outcomes to positive thoughts. But like all things, there is always a swinging between two extremes, right? So let's say that we have this pendulum, right? And at the center, we have this ball. And on one extreme, we have negative thinking or just general negativity. And on the other side, we have positive thinking or a general positive attitude. The mistake that people make is that they try and force the ball out over here and they try to hold it in place there, right? They use all this conscious effort to maintain positive thoughts. When they see something that happens to them, they try and put a positive spin on it. When they feel like shit, they try and say, you know what? No, I'm going to have a good day today. It's going to be a good day. I'm going to think positively. The problem with this is, like all things, the energy that you're putting into sustaining that can only be sustained for so long. So you try and sustain this positive attitude until one day something happens. You get a negative text from your boss or from your girlfriend. You lose a client. You have some form of upset. Maybe you even just stub your toe. And all of this repressed negativity, because at the end of the day, when you're trying to prop up this side, you're oppressing its opposite. All that energy that you're putting in to repressing it ends up resurfacing, and you end up swinging all the way back into extreme negativity. And overthinking is very much like this, right? It's very much a swinging between these 2 points. And the problem is that people don't see this trap that they've fallen into. For example, in my life, when I was the most depressed, when I was overthinking everything in my life the most, it was always on the back end of an extremely positive time in my life. And a time in my life where I was really optimizing for positive thoughts, trying to be generally optimistic, and just ignoring and repressing any form of negativity in my life. Of course, when the inevitable swing back happens on this pendulum, you absolutely collapse. I mean, for me personally, I stopped going to the gym because I was just too overwhelmed. I stopped working on my business because I was too overwhelmed. And I became extremely depressed to the point where I was just, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I was in a very bad place where I was really considering some things that I would, really have regretted considering and actually doing. Now, what is the solution to this, right? Because obviously when we see this pendulum and we see, well, if the answer is not positivity, which is the thing we want, and it's not avoiding negativity, which is again the thing I don't want, then what is the solution? Well, there's a 3-step process that I like to think through, and essentially it's this simple, right? So let's put in 3 different columns, and let's title them in this way. So firstly, we have the negative thought. Secondly, we have the neutral side of that, and then we have now. So essentially what I want you to do is go through a process of identifying what are the thought patterns that you are trying to run from that are negative, or the things that you're overthinking about yourself. For example, it's not uncommon for people to think that they are unattractive and have insecurities around their looks. So maybe the negative thought is that I am ugly. Now, what a lot of people make the mistake of doing, and you see this very much in the whole girl boss space, right? The whole female affirmation space. And look, there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but I'm just going to say outright that it doesn't work, which is that if you don't feel good looking, you should essentially just tell yourself that you're beautiful, and everyone around you should tell you that you're beautiful. Even if you're, 150 kilos at 5'2", you should believe that you are beautiful, because beauty doesn't justify, a certain weight, right? Beauty isn't just held within this small range of BMI index or body weight to height ratio. But in reality, there is some inherent truth to that. There is inherent truth to the opposite of that, I should say. There is inherent truth to the fact that there are objective definitions of beauty. So all I'm trying to say here, to bring this back to this process, is that if you have a negative thought, the solution is not to try and flip it to its positive, because that's not going to work. You're never going to believe yourself. What you have to do is instead bring it to a neutral perspective. So what is the neutral attitude towards this sense that I'm ugly? Well, maybe you're objectively overweight. maybe at the moment, your skin is breaking out. Maybe you don't have a tan like you did in summer, right? Maybe you've allowed yourself to get a bit sloppy with your hair and with your facial hair and with the way that you dress, whatever it may be. Try and find the unemotional, right? Because these are all I am statements that are very, let's just say, subjective, right? This is a subjective thing. I am ugly, right? There is no objective, like, here's what makes you good looking or ugly. But there is also an objective way of looking at it, which is, okay, if I believe that I'm ugly, what are the objective metrics I'm basing this off? Well, a lot of the time it's going to come down to, for example, being overweight. I am objectively, 140 kilos at 5'8", right? You're obviously overweight at that weight. So what this means is that rather than having this subjective negative reality, we're starting to shift more towards the neutral objective reality. But we don't want to stop there. What we then want to do is obviously get something out of this process. What are we going to do moving forward that's actually going to support us in overcoming this negative thought? Because it's one thing to just reframe the belief. It's another thing to change your reality to match a new belief. So now, what can we do to overcome this objective problem? Well, we can obviously start going to the gym. We can obviously start dieting. We could maybe hire a coach. There are objective things that we can do to overcome this objective problem that is creating this subjective perspective of ourselves. And this is really the entire process. Instead of swinging back and forth between self-delusion and trying to distract yourself from the problems and then swinging back to becoming ruminating and obsessive about these problems, all we have to do is actually create an objective plan by looking at it objectively. And there are a million different examples that you could apply this to. I'm not going to go into all of them here because I just want to walk you through the process. But essentially, the entire process is identify the negative subjective attitude that you have towards yourself that you're ruminating on and overthinking on, shift it into a neutral perspective. What is the objective thing that is true about this judgment of myself? And then now, what am I going to do about it? What is the tangible action that I can take in order to obviously overcome and resolve this objective problem? And then also, as a result of that, transcend and ultimately overcome that subjective problem. So again, wanted to keep this one short and brief. Hope it was valuable. If it was, subscribe and I will see you in the next one.